In this episode, we discuss Wonder Woman 1984 with friend of the show, David Raiklen. Full speed ahead.
The Omega Beam. Full power.
Welcome to the Omega Beam number 108. I'm your host, Oren Merton. I hope you had a safe and enjoyable holiday. This year, as you probably know, Wonder Woman 1984 was released on December 25th, both in theaters and on HBO Max, which is a godsend for those of us who live in regions in which there were no theaters open. So we watched it at home. Our friend David Raiklen saw it at a drive-in theater, and we're here to discuss it with you. We start off with a spoiler-free section. So if you haven't seen it yet and you just like to listen to our review and some of our initial thoughts without any spoilers, you can listen to that part and you won't get anything that you won't find in the trailer. We're very, very clear when we switch to using spoilers and talking about the entire movie. So you'll have ample time to pause the episode, watch the film, and then come back and pick up the podcast where you left off. I also want to mention that this is a Zoom conversation that we recorded. So unfortunately, some portions of the sound quality aren't quite where it is in other episodes, and I apologize for that. So let's get to it. I am here with Golden and guest of the show, David Raiklen, to talk about the brand new feature film, Wonder Woman 1984. Hello, David.
Wonder Woman 1984. Wow, I just saw that. Great movie.
Pretty much.
What a coincidence. So did we.
I know. You'd almost think it debuted on Christmas Day, both in the theaters and on HBO Max in the USA. So
well, that would never happen. That would have to be some kind of alternate reality.
I know, it would. So I figure what we'll do is we'll start spoiler-free and just talk about our impressions. And then when it's time to get fully spoilerific, we will give everyone a warning and a pause so they can take some time to catch up with the film and then come back to the podcast later. So spoiler-free first. What did we all think of it?
I thought it was really fun.
I agree. I thought it was a different movie than the first one.
Yep, that too.
I liked how Wonder Woman starts in a different place, both physically and emotionally, and it's a movie that takes us to a different place.
And there's a little bit of a role swap or role reversal because now this is a world that she's familiar with that he's not. But overall, like I told someone on Twitter when they asked, about it, I felt like, this is different from the first. It has fleshed out characters, some humor, some drama, some action, 80s nostalgia, even if everything isn't quite perfectly in the time period that it's supposed to be in. And at the very least, enjoyable. It's not the same impact. It doesn't have that punch of the first, but it's also not dark and brooding like a lot of the other DC movies. It's kind of like the first Wonder Woman was the first time you ever went on that big roller coaster. Now, every other roller coaster that you go on is still going to be exciting, but it's just never going to be like that very first.
Yeah, that's kind of a true thing that is only got exceptions with Star Wars, where the sequel was better than the first movie, even though the first movie was one of the great movies of all time. Also with The Godfather. Where The Godfather 2, two greatest movies of all time back to back. And I'm not sure if that's happened many other times. It's very rare. Most of the other movies in series are a step back from the awesomeness of the first time you saw it. But I think that this was also a deliberate thing. I really believe that either Warner's or I think it's possible that Kathy Jenkins said that let's make this more of a family movie than that first one, which is about a very bloody world war that really happened. And these characters are in that, but it's basically a World War I story that, where Wonder Woman is the hero, and that's an amazing, brilliant idea. This is less serious. Even though she's kind of the hero of the Cold War, that's not so much what this movie is about.
Right.
And
that
if that was a spoiler, my apologies, but I don't think that gives much away because people kind of know what happens in 1984, right?
Right.
We know a little bit about what that world is like, who were the movie stars and who was the president and all that.
And you had a really good 80s vibe to it. Like Oren was saying when we were watching it, he's like, yeah, even the credits, they feel very 80s. You even see Kevin Smith mentioning the fact that it is a very Richard Donner feel to it. And it pays tribute to that original Superman movie with Christopher Reeves that so many of us loved.
Yes. I think the first one did too. In fact, they do a wonderful reversal with Wonder Woman saving Steve from the bullet, and instead of Clark saving Lois from the bullet.
I think that one of the things about superhero movies that I like is, and it's Marvel has really cracked this code, and some of the DC movies, that is that fundamentally the idea of someone putting on tights to beat people up is silly. I mean, that in itself, already you have to suspend disbelief. And I think when they've attempted to get sort of gritty and realistic and all the rest, I mean, it's not easy to walk that line, because it is absurd at a certain level that we are just rolling with this. The movies that I think really get it right,
it's a kid's fantasy,
right, are the ones that lean into it.
Fantasies are not serious, and they do not make highly logical sense most of the time. And that's one of the reasons that they're timeless, is because the logic, the cultural standards, whatever of a particular time, don't necessarily constrain the kid's fantasy. So it can be something unique and weird, and
and in some ways,
and Wonder Woman is all that.
Wonder Woman is a lot more carefree and has a lot more humor to her than Diana Prince. If you think about how she interacts with some of the people as Wonder Woman versus how she interacts with as Diana Prince. As Diana Prince, she's much more serious and just down to business. But yet, as Wonder Woman, there's a level of humor that she passes on. There's one point in the movie where she interacts with a child. And that interaction with the child just adds a little bit of levity to what could be a dark situation.
Yes. In a way, that's the most beautiful kind of wish fulfillment, because when you're reading a comic book, you can't be in the movie that's in your mind, or that's on the page. With a movie, where you go to the theater and also TV shows, you can actually have your surrogate, somebody standing in for you that gets to meet with them. And, someday I hope to meet Gal Gadot too, because I think she's a real role model kind of hero. And that's very rare. And it's a wonderful thing to see.
I also want to just touch on...
Although it goes by really quickly. I don't mean to interrupt, but I have to jump in. The movie flies by, or at least it did for me. I was amazed when I found out how long it was.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, it's a 2.5-hour movie that moves really fast.
It doesn't seem like that much time passed in the movie.
Yeah. Before we get spoilerific, I just also want to mention that I thought the visuals are great. The acting is great, really great. The music was great. They picked, Hans Zimmer did a wonderful a wonderful score, and I thought the music that they picked from the 80s was really good. So it was just enjoyable all around.
Yes, very much a movie that has kind of something for everybody. And there are people who will love it. There's people who will like it. There'll be people who don't like it. But I'd say it's definitely worth a shot. If you've considered watching Wonder Woman 1984, go for it. I think you'll have a fun time and see it on the biggest screen you can possibly get.
Yeah. That's a good point. That's the last thing I think we should mention. we saw it in our home theater system on HBO Max. You actually
Cool.
saw it on the big screen.
Yeah, we went to the movies and saw it on a 50-foot outdoor screen that was really very cinematic, and the sound was really pumping because, you got people with these wonderful car stereo systems, including the ones that have the subwoofers. And, when all the cars are close together, boy, you can feel that vibration. But there's a lot more privacy, and you have, a much better snack selection. They gave us some nice free snacks, too. But, yeah, this was definitely a movie to see out of doors with other people because it's got all this heart and humor that comes alive, more when you're with other people. And the action, I think, would play okay on a small screen. But, there's scenes where... how should I say, there's superhuman feats that really do well when they're large.
Yeah, this is one that I would, if I had the opportunity to go see it in 3D IMAX, I would see it in 3D IMAX. Because I have a feeling, and I don't know if it was even available for 3D IMAX, but I know IMAX it was.
It was 2D IMAX.
But still, I mean, having
she
it...
has a new power that we didn't see in the first episode, and... that's as far as I'll go until we get spoilerific.
Well, not just one. There are a couple. Which
and those powers are especially good for big screen.
I'm sure. Yeah. I mean, we personally have a very, very nice entertainment system. It's definitely large in here, but nothing compared to the hugeness,
the proportions that you would have at a movie theater
that you get in the theaters. And that's one of the things. When people were bemoaning the fact that so many movies, not just Warner Brothers, but Disney just dropped another movie, Soul, on Disney+.
Yeah, that's another one where you got to see it on a big screen, even though it plays just fine on a small screen.
I was sad in the spring because we had just gone to see Onward, and Onward was absolutely incredible, especially on the big screen. And then the stay at home and theaters closed, and now Onward was no longer available on that big screen. And it is such a wonderful movie that I felt bad that other people weren't going to be able to experience it like we did.
Yeah, absolutely.
I understand.
So there you have it, everyone. If you haven't seen it yet, go see it.
Go enjoy it. Just have fun. Be a kid again. Be a kid watching a superhero movie.
Exactly.
Bring a kid with you if you have any in your pod.
Yeah, that is true. I think this is a good opportunity to give it just a couple seconds. If you haven't seen it yet, stop the podcast here and come back after you've watched it. But for the rest of us, okay, 3, 2, spoilers in effect.
Spoilers.
So I gotta say, and I told this to Golden when I first saw it happen, that as someone who's read a lot of Wonder Woman comics, she's changed a lot from writer to writer, from decade to decade. And there were 2 elements on the page that never really worked for me. And the one was the invisible jet. And the other was when just in the comics, literally one day she can't fly, and then the next issue she can. And I never liked either the invisible jet or flight until this movie. I thought Patty Jenkins did both of them so well that I just ran with it, and I loved it.
You were able to be the kid.
I was able to be the kid. And to me, that's the sign of good writing, good direction, good acting. It just worked.
Yeah,
I do wonder.
The visual effects crew did a terrific job. The cloudscapes and the sense of speed. I mean, like really high speed in the sky. It was just so well done that it really felt like something that was a superhero movie.
Yeah.
And it gets harder to do that after you get a bit, what's the word for it? accustomed to the power level of your favorite hero.
Right.
So to see them level up a little bit is cool.
It did lead me to a couple questions that were left unanswered. Where is the jet parked, and how are they going to refuel it? 2, if she could fly in this movie, she also was able to fly in Batman v Superman. We just didn't see it.
Well, that movie does seem to exist, kind of. But,
Well, the way I see it is in Batman v
and what
Superman.
I'm, intimating there is that I think Patty Jenkins wanted to have a more or less standalone movie.
Yeah.
And I think that,
it works that way.
DC is not heading towards that part of Marvelification where the stories and characters all interweave.
Well, she didn't really need to fly in Batman v Superman.
There was one scene where she, during the sort of boss battle, where she takes a very, 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 very long leap. So one could argue, was that her flying,
half jump, half
or was
fly?
that her jumping, or whatever?
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately,
Well, that shot definitely was somewhere between flying and jumping. And now we can probably say, all right, it was flying.
Yeah.
She started
And
with
then
a jump and...
Oren suggested maybe she just put the plane back where it was
Mhm.
and then decloaked it.
Right, just returned it, decloaked. I also really liked the in-movie justification for the invisible plane, because in the original comic, she had the invisible plane from the very first episode or comics of Wonder Woman, and it was just they built one on the island, which I never really got into that. And then later it was sort of changed to, well, Bruce Wayne, he built her an invisible plane. And it's like, well, okay, fine. Why didn't he then build himself one? If he could do that. But I really liked the way that they just sort of made it magic. Because when you just say it's magic, you don't need to say more. Because it doesn't need an explanation at that point.
And then you still do wonder where she did end up leaving that coffee cup.
Yeah, that was a funny line. So yeah, I really liked that. And I also really loved when she learned to fly, how they turned it in. I was deeply moved by her letting go of Steve Trevor. And we're supposed to obviously feel how hard it was for her to let go of, as she put it, the one thing she wanted to keep for herself, that she's giving everything of herself willingly. And she just wanted this one thing for herself, but she can't have it. And the way that Patty Jenkins turned her learning to fly into a tribute to Steve Trevor, I thought was beautiful. It was beautiful.
Yeah, well, it's very personal filmmaking in a way that most people won't get, and that it's, quote, personal, but it will be emotionally and memorably powerful filmmaking. And that's what I'm looking forward to in her Star Wars movie. I think that Rogue Squadron is also going to have that kind of heartfelt uplift and intensity. And, in a way, that's sort of where the best of comic books and the best of movies and the best of a lot of art forms come together, where they give you this feeling of exaltation and being elevated. And,
absolutely.
I don't want it to sound like I'm saying this is the greatest movie since the invention of celluloid, but but it's really got a lot of wonderful moments in it, and the rest is just fun.
Yeah, and speaking of those wonderful moments, one of the things I told this to Golden, that we were both talking about it. I liked how in this movie they allowed Wonder Woman to be vulnerable. Both emotionally vulnerable, but also physically vulnerable. It's like when in Batman v Superman or a lot of the Marvel movies, it doesn't need to just be DC movies, the male heroes, they're never really vulnerable. They can get beaten up, but it's usually just they took a punch and they're grunting, and then they're going to get up and they're going to give as good as they got. But they allowed Diana to be punched into a wall and be gruff and bleeding and just be vulnerable, be looking there, be sitting there like, what the hell? And just be vulnerable. And I love that.
I think that's a change that's been occurring.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would say that Jason Momoa's Aquaman does have vulnerable moments.
Yeah.
I would say that Shazam definitely has vulnerable moments.
Mm-hmm.
So it's starting to evolve and come around. So it's not just the dark and broody DC movie.
Yeah, well, she's making her own Jenkinsverse section area of the DC universe, and I like it. And hopefully she'll be
I would
back
agree
to
with
do
that.
one
And
more.
I think that the best comic book movies, and I touched on this in the spoiler-free part, but a lot of the Marvel movies and the Jenkinsverse and Aquaman, Shazam, I would even say Birds of Prey, these movies, they lean in to the fantasy, they lean into the superhero, and they're not embarrassed about it. They're not ashamed of it. I love Man of Steel. I thought it was a great movie, but Superman, the word Superman is only said twice. And once Lois Lane is attempting to name him Superman, and she's cut off. And the other time is when he is a soldier is explaining to the general that Superman is going to a certain base and says they're there with Superman, and the general looks at him and says, Superman? And the soldier looks embarrassed and says almost ashamedly, Superman, sir, that's what they're calling the alien Superman. It's like they're ashamed of superhero. They're ashamed of superheroics. And I like that now you've got a bunch of these standalone movies where they're leaning into it. And I think it makes them better. And Marvel's been doing that forever. They've been leaning into the superheroics.
How about that Asteria storyline and cameo?
Oh, the cameo is wonderful.
See, a friend of mine and I both looked at it and was thinking, okay, well, is that Barbara Minerva? And she's just wearing a wig.
But as soon as you saw the bracelet, as soon as she reaches up, grabs a pole, and you see
that
the,
and the blue.
Amazonian bracelet.
For some reason, that blue for me is Linda Carter's Wonder Woman.
Yes, well, that's great direction there. To make that little flash of clue register immediately.
It was a wonderful tribute to the woman who started it all as far as live action, and it fit the story. It was not just stunt casting. It also fit the story.
Yeah, well, the movie exists because of Linda Carter. I mean,
right.
That's just the reality, and they wouldn't be, faulted if they didn't do a tribute to her, but it's awesome that they did.
Yeah.
And I read that they wanted to do something with the first movie, and it just didn't work out. So they found a way to make it work for the second movie.
Right.
Yeah, well, the way they made it work is they made her more central to the plot, so it was harder to cut her out.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, it's funny, speaking of that reminded me, as Patty Jenkins has been doing the press rounds to promote Wonder Woman 1984, she, of course, was asked questions and gave details about the first one, which is universally praised and is beloved by most anyone with any kind of taste. But most people do agree that the boss battle at the end is just a little bit, it's not the highlight of the movie. Let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. And she admitted that the original ending was much shorter, but that the studio mandated that there be a more effects-heavy, grand conclusion to the series.
I wasn't sure if that was for the first movie or the second.
First movie, yeah.
For the first movie.
That Wonder Woman, the first one, had a shorter ending. But that the studio looked at it and said, we want more special effects.
But she was happy with how it turned out.
Yeah, I'm sure she directed it and did the best she could with it.
And I think people are expecting that a superhero movie has to have a big boss battle at the end.
Well, enough
it-
that they're willing to, make sure that happens. And there were actually kind of two big boss battles in the new movie.
Right.
One was
two different kinds of
physical.
what?
The other one was more mental and emotional.
I was actually really impressed that with Maxwell Lord, the ending was not her punchy, but it was her using her powers to make him see what he was doing and
Yes.
to use emotion to win.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I would have to say that my simple answer to how Wonder Woman defeats Max Lord is with the lasso of truth.
Right.
And she forces him to tell the truth in a way that he can't evade anymore. And that causes his mind to change. So she defeated him with the truth, and the truth had the power to change his mind. And it turned out that was the key to beating the evil spell of the Wish Stone.
Here's something
Because
that
that
Golden
was
knows.
supposed to be malignant magic, right?
Right. Here's something that Golden
Masquerading
knows
as benign.
because it's what I told her. For those who have not read a lot of Wonder Woman comics, the character of Maxwell Lord is a little bit controversial in the Wonder Woman mythology because Wonder Woman in the comics snapped his neck, that he had mind-controlled Superman, and she finally was able to subdue Superman, and she subdued Maxwell Lord, and he said that he would never, ever stop what he is doing as long as he lived. So Wonder Woman went, okay, and killed him. And it was a big deal, and I think she was even kicked out of the Justice League for all that. So for the entire film, I thought that's where they were going, especially because it was written by Jeff Johns, who's like the ultimate DC Comics encyclopedia. So he obviously knew that. And they were building it up to, okay, Max Lord is the Dreamstone. You have to get rid of the Dreamstone. And I was like, okay, this is what she's going to do, that he will never renounce his wish. So she has to basically turn off the Dreamstone, so to speak, by killing him. And maybe that's why I was so impressed with the ending, that she found a way to not kill him. And I found that really refreshing, because normally it's sort of, we just sort of hand wave away the brutality of it all. And if the superheroes have to, kill 100 people to get the job done, that's okay. They're superheroes. But I appreciate the fact that Wonder Woman absolutely was going to find a way to do the job without killing people.
Yes. In a way, that is another big difference with the first movie.
Right, that was a war movie.
It makes her different from other superheroes. And again, I think she's a great role model.
Mm-hmm.
I think that in a way, the DC counterpart, Captain America, is Wonder Woman.
Mm-hmm.
And that they're fundamentally good and noble people who cannot be corrupted in the conventional sense and will always be counted on to do the right thing, and they will.
Right.
And the villain can get away. The choice is the villain gets away or children are killed.
Mm-hmm.
And she's going to choose save the children.
Yeah, but she does eventually get the villain anyway.
Well,
And
yeah.
Again, I think that's key, is that her method of superheroing is different than the others. Even though she has superpowers, her whole philosophy is kind of different too. And we know that she has a different philosophy because she comes from this completely different culture, right?
And I'd like to know how she goes dark between here and Batman v Superman. And I think there's a story. There's probably a story there. Why is it that she chooses not to be as out there?
Well, who
as
knows
some
when the
others?
next one will be sent?
Right, we'll
set.
find
it could
out later.
be in a present day in a way that would make sense.
Oren is thinking it's going to be cheetah related, since we have no idea what happened to Dr. Barbara Minerva.
Right. They just left Barbara Minerva sad on a hill on a rock.
But Cheetah was beautiful.
Yeah,
Cheetah was
again
gorgeous.
wonderful effects. And we need to talk about the acting. I mean, I generally like Kristen Wiig, but I thought she was phenomenal in this role. I mean, she was just so both sympathetic and bad.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you know, she made that transition from a character you completely empathize with to a character who is swallowed by her darkness. She made it believable.
Her greatest thing was her humanity, and that's what she was giving up in becoming Cheetah.
Right. And, you know, obviously we've already talked about how Gal Gadot is Wonder Woman. I mean, she just nails that part like you cannot imagine anyone else playing Patty Jenkins' Wonder Woman other than Gal Gadot.
Yeah, and I'm super excited, enthusiastic about the spy thriller that they're doing together.
Right. And I believe Patty and Gal Gadot are also now starting on a Cleopatra that will... It's just the earliest production, but they announced they're both doing that too. I think they're a great team. I think they inspire each other, and I just love seeing Gal Gadot on screen and Patty Jenkins
and I thought
Wonder Woman.
Pedro Pascal was... I saw a cute meme the other day showing the how it can be the most loved hero and also a despised villain.
Mm-hmm.
Again, he managed to walk that line of being bigger than life, being air quotes evil in the sense that he's just completely selfish and doesn't care about others. Not that he wants harming others is never his goal. It's just he doesn't care who gets harmed in the pursuit of his goal. And at the same time, being a human who ultimately is sympathetic under it all. I thought it was not an easy, line to walk, and yet he did.
And you can see very easily what's happening with Max Lord's character with this is someone who absolutely loves his son and wants to give his son everything. And then, what, my son is here now?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have time for that. And it's very clear what he's starting to lose.
Yeah.
Yes, well, magic element of superheroes was strong with this particular movie. The more science fictional elements were stronger in the first movie. I hope they go in a more science fiction direction for the next one, but I can see the fantasy ones are okay too. I mean, I'm enjoying Stargirl, and that's definitely on the fantasy side of superhero rather than the sci-fi side.
Yeah, a lot of it depends, I think, on. Interesting you mentioned Stargirl because Jeff Johns co-wrote Wonder Woman 1984, and he's the showrunner of Stargirl, which is, he created the character as a tribute to his sister. That is his baby through and through. And I think certain writers just have a feel for certain things.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that Jeff Johns is able to take sort of hand-wavium and magic and make it work, whereas others maybe don't.
And also maybe female empowerment and making sure that the strong female character is actually a really good role model.
Right. Yeah, Patty Jenkins said something really interesting. She was talking about the relationship between Barbara and Diana before the major part of the plot that turned them into rivals. And she was saying that some men that she had talked to said, why was Diana saying that she envied parts of Barbara? That makes no sense. And Patty Jenkins was like, you don't know women. It does make sense. She's all, women get it, but men don't. And I think that's just a sign of how real the relationship is and how real Patty Jenkins is able to make what are basically, larger than life fantasy relationships and ground them completely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's full of fantasy and it's full of reality. It's that wonderful mix.
Yeah. I've seen some people online who have expressed some disappointment. I think that if you expected Wonder Woman 1984 to be the same movie as the first Wonder Woman, just set, 60 years later or whatever, you will be disappointed because it is a different movie that has a different tone and goes in a different place. But I think both are completely valid and both are really interesting ways to advance and evolve the character.
Well, I'm looking forward to Suicide Squad and the other DC-verse movies.
And Zack Snyder's, Justice League.
I'm looking forward to Zack Snyder's Justice League. It's gonna be the opposite of this in the sense that it's gonna be darker than dark, blacker than black, bleaker than bleak. But what it's going to have is it's going to have an absolutely cohesive art direction and theme and plot that the theatrical release did not have.
And I'm guessing that it's still going to have what Batman v Superman had in terms of whenever Wonder Woman's on screen, there's like this extra light in the room.
Yeah, well, that shines from Gal Gadot and the character in general. So yeah, absolutely.
She lights up the screen. I'm looking forward to whatever she's in next. I am, a pretty big fan of the Wonder Woman films now.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked about this after seeing the movie as well, that we both really appreciated the fact of how he's inhabiting this other person's body. And at first she doesn't see that it's him, but as soon as she knows it really is him, now the only thing that she can see is the Steve Trevor that she knows.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not long before we saw this movie, we had watched Source Code, in which Jake Gyllenhaal inhabits another person's body, and whenever he looks in a mirror or a window, the reflection you see is the reflection of the actual individual who's in it. However, we, the audience, see it as Jake Gyllenhaal, the actor who is inhabiting this other body. Yeah. So they do Steve Trevor that way, that it is Chris Pine inhabiting another body. But I think, like you were saying, the way that they did that, I found beautiful, where rather than just it being a conceit for the audience, that because they hired a name actor and so they wanted to show him, she says, "I only see you." And so we are seeing Steve through Wonder Woman's eyes, and I think it's actually a beautiful story point, and not just they hired Chris Pine so they wanted to use him.
And at the end, she sees this other guy, and she can't see Steve in him because he's not Steve.
Yeah, he's his own person, and probably Diana Prince's love interest for the next movie.
Maybe, or maybe not. We will see.
I think that would be kind of weird. I think
superheroes are weird. There's no doubt about it.
At the end. I'm like, well, that'd be kind of weird though, because still the same body, and you kind of already used that person's body to be your love.
Right. Then you get to explain why you know where everything is in his apartment, and.
But it was cute that he ended up wearing exactly what she wanted Steve to wear.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That was cute. And of course, we were talking about the actors, so we have to mention the fact that Chris Pine is another one of those actors who is more or less excellent in anything he's in. Mm-hmm. And he gives that same wonderful dynamic and relationship and chemistry that he has with Gal Gadot, and it comes across, and I just adore him as Steve Trevor.
He's just cherishing moments with her. He's like, oh, let's just stay in bed. Okay, we'll stay in bed. But we probably should find out why this is happening. Okay, that sounds like a good idea. Let's go do that. I don't think he really cares as long as he's with her.
Yeah.
I think that they do a good job of playing the love story in a sweet kind of normal way, and they don't get epic with that.
Right. It's, I think this is a really well put together, well written, fun comic book movie. I think if people expect it to be Shakespeare, they'll be disappointed. But at the same time, I think some people who have been more negative than we're being, it's because they either have they're either expecting something that I don't think they should be expecting. I actually read something on Twitter that just it just made no sense to me.
Managing expectations?
Yeah. I guess some reviewers have been comparing the Maxwell Lord character, saying that he is a Donald Trump-like character. And so I guess some people have been very upset without even seeing the movie that if he's a villain, he must... Yeah, he's not. I mean, he's not. Pedro Pascal said he didn't think of it as Trumpian at all. He thought of it as more of a Gordon Gekko 80s type of just a...
there's some of that too. Well, what it comes down to is that people see in art what they want to see.
Right.
And the better the art, the more they see in it. So you can get really different interpretations of a good piece of art. Mm-hmm. And there are certain things that people will have in common. I think most people would see Max Lord as a villain. And that he's definitely a villainous television salesman.
Yeah, he's a villainous television salesman. I don't think he was modeled off any politicians. I think he was modeled more on, like you said, kind of slimy.
More like a Tony Robbins kind of person. Although there's other things in there too. Well, This is what it comes down to, is if you create something that's really original, people will be alienated and not understand it. And if you create something that's entirely derivative, then it will be boring to most people. So somewhere in between.
Yeah, right. And that, I think they did
have elements that are going to remind people of other characters or real people. That's just the way it's going to be.
Yeah.
And speaking of characters, we were very happy to see Robin Wright back as Antiope.
Yes, even if it's just a flashback.
Yeah.
Robin Wright is one of those like almost perfect actresses, and I thought she did a great Antiope. Is that how you pronounce it?
Antiope.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought she did a fantastic version in the first movie, and even if she was only in the beginning for a little bit, just seeing her there just makes things better.
I'm looking forward to seeing Wonder Woman 1984 again. This time on the small screen, and lots of other good things to see. I just want to give a little mention to the wonderful soundtrack. Full of these joyful and happy moments that are so rare in any movie, and especially in a modern superhero movie, where the joy and the magic are elevated. And David Fleming and Steve Mazzaro were the people who did the additional music, and my guess is that they probably did the non-dark stuff.
Yeah, the soundtrack was wonderful. Even Hans Zimmer, there's a certain interesting convergence of him doing a movie set in 1984, in that he was also working with a pop band at the time, the Buggles, and you can see him in the video for Video Killed the Radio Star. Mm-hmm. So that also makes sort of sense in the era that it's playing. I thought they picked a lot of great 80s music. Poor Golden had to sit with me sitting there pointing out every 80s song.
Yeah, well, it has an interesting overall soundtrack. And there's some real good montages to 80s music. So it has that going, too.
But were you sitting there pointing out whether or not the song was actually out in 1984 or not?
No, I couldn't tell you if the song was actually out in 1984.
I don't care if they bend the rules a little bit. These are fantasy worlds, so we're not doing a documentary on the 1984. We're putting a superhero in a slightly nostalgic world, so we can do a morality tale of good versus evil.
Yeah, one of the people I follow on Twitter, there was a thread going as to the fact that several of the games in the arcade were not out at that time.
Right, but they were at that time in the world of the movie. And that's what I'd say to those people, is that you got to get with the program. The movie is in a world where those did come out at that time.
Right. The movie takes place in fantasy 1984, which is a sort of conglomeration of real-world 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And it did that beautifully. Well, I think we kind of covered it.
Yeah, I think we covered a lot of that movie, which is, one of my favorites. I recommend it, and there's things I'm going to go back for.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, David.
Hey, thank you, guys. It was wonderful, as always, to go to the movies with you and then chat about it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Golden.
And that will happen eventually.
Well, virtual is good. I'm fine with that. I feel like I'm talking to my friendly faces.
That's right.
You're not far away at all.
And that's it for this episode. You can find the show notes at theomegabeam.com/108. If you like this episode, please leave a review in the Apple Podcasts app or wherever you listen to podcasts. Reviews help people who like this stuff find our podcast. If you have any comments or suggestions, please drop us a line at info@theomegabeam.com. Be good to yourselves and each other, and we'll catch you next time.
The Omega Beam. Full stop.